Good afternoon and welcome to this edition of the Big East Rewind. I'm Chuck Everson, your host, and my co-host, as always, my point guard, my main man, Sonny Spera from Syracuse University. How are you, Sonny?
I'm well, Chuck. It's nice to hear you pronounce Syracuse correctly. That's very nice.
Well, I got a lesson from Len Berman, so I better pay attention, So that's how we do it,
That's how we roll, baby.
We have a good show today, Sonny. One of my guys from the 85 team, one of our assistants who went on to be a head coach at Manhattan and also at UMass and back most notably at Villanova. Steve Lappas is joining us today. I can't wait to talk to Steve. So let's bring Steve in, the great Steve Lappas, former head coach at Villanova. How are you, Steve? So good to see you.
Chuck, it's great to see you guys. Even a Syracuse guy, I'll throw that in here too. But it is great to be on with you guys. You've done a great job with this Big East Rewind, just bringing up the history of this great conference. And I'm not saying it's a great conference today, but as you know, what this thing was back in the day, it's great now, no doubt about it. Villanova's been terrific, obviously, in the Big East, but those heydays of the 80s and 90s, boy, it'd be tough to recreate.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's been such a labor of love for Sonny and I because we get to meet guys we haven't really spoke with. We had Mike Tranghese on and talked to him, got a little history lesson. We've got a bunch of folks lined up. We've had officials, we've had mascots. It's been like a 360-degree view of the whole conference from back in the day. So it's really been kind of cool to hear everybody's stories,
Well, you guys have done a terrific job bringing up the history, with the guys that you've had. And now you kind of brought me down a little bit that you had officials on. I don't know what you had officials on for. What they have to do with it, I don't know.
Let me tell you, Steve, Froggy Paparo, to hear him tell the story about what happened with, Hawk and Mike Graham is unbelievable, hilarious. And Timmy Higgins and, Eddie Corbett, we had, and Manji was on too. So it's just been fun hearing the stories from the sidelines, which coaches, gave them a tough time and, all those kinds of things. It's kind of funny to reminisce and go back like that. It's been a lot of fun.
Oh, no doubt about it.
Got to thank you, Coach, but I also got to compliment you. I see that you Villanova guys have a little something in common. Your background, you're all about the the bling and the advertising and all that good stuff. You're challenging Chuck. You're JV. Yeah. Chuck is varsity.
We go back and forth, Steve, on this subject all the time, Sonny and I.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Look, he's in the shrine, and you got like you might have a mini altar. Chuck's got the shrine. Yours is all right. This is all good.
Yeah. Sonny works right straight out of the kitchen like every Italian, Steve. You know what I mean?
Well, right, you do this long enough, you better have some memorabilia, otherwise you're in trouble. That's
right.
Sure.
That's right. So let's jump in. Steve, you came to Villanova from Harry S. Truman High School where you coached, right? Now, did you grow up where, in the Heights, in Washington Heights?
I grew up in Washington Heights. I played basketball in a high school at Bronx Science in the Bronx.
Yeah.
And it's funny that this is what I wanted. I wanted to be in basketball. I knew that everybody else in my school would want to become doctors, lawyers, scientists. And here was a guy who wanted to actually, I didn't want to become a basketball coach out of high school. I wanted to become a doctor until I took organic chemistry. And Sonny, I'm sure you got a good grade in organic chemistry or you wouldn't have become the dentist you've become. I did not get a good grade in organic chemistry. And it kind of made me, I wasn't willing to go to medical school anywhere in the world, like a lot of guys, where I wanted to stay in the United States. I probably would not have gotten in and decided to go this route. And truthfully, I feel like I've never worked a day in my life because I've always loved what I've had the opportunity to do. So I have no regrets, and I've been very, very lucky.
You got to send a thank you card to your organic chemistry teacher for giving you a hard time so that you could choose the passion that you love, man.
And no doubt about it. That C+ that I got, really changed my life. No doubt about it.
So Sonny, we were just talking prior to coming on with Steve, and he won a city championship which is pretty cool. He was sixth man on the city championship team. Talk about that for a second, Steve.
Well, back in my junior year in high school in 1971, I was my first year on the varsity at Bronx Science. We had a really, really good team. I played for a great coach named Norm Lefkowitz, and he just passed away probably 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. And he was one of the founders of Five Star with Howard Garfinkel. He was on the first staff of Five Star with Howard Garfinkel. Tremendous coach. And we weren't that talented, but we were a team that played really smart. And, we held the ball. We kept the scores down. And he was a great coach. And so we won the city championship my junior year. We didn't have as good a year my senior year in high school, probably because I was starting. But my junior year, I was coming off the bench, and we had a great team, won a city championship in high school as a junior. So that was a real big thrill, especially at a school like Bronx Science. We weren't really known for having good teams or good athletics. And, right. And actually my sophomore year, I was on the JV. They won it. So they won it 2 years in a row. I was on the team 1 year, but we won it 2 years in a row.
Wow. So now you coached, your first real big coaching job was at Harry S. Truman, right? In high school. So you had a guy on that team by the name of Rod Strickland, right? So you guys had quite the squad there too. You won some championships there as well, right?
Yeah, we won the city championship and the state championship in 1984. And, Rod was a junior. And, it's funny, when Rod came into Truman High School, he was a sophomore. He transferred from Rice High School. And the funny thing was, a lot of his friends told me, they said, well, we got this guy coming in. We think he's really good. I said, well, that's great, And I'll never forget the first time I saw him. He was 15 years old. He was a sophomore. And the first time he went up and down the court, I turned to my brother, who was my assistant coach at the time, and I said, you know what? I think that's what a pro looks like when he's 15. You could just tell. And he was like 5'9", 130 pounds. But you could tell the way he bounced that ball, there was something very special about this guy. And I say it to this day, Rod Strickland is he's certainly the most underrated dribbler of the basketball in the history of the NBA. If anybody dribbled the ball better than Rod Strickland, I'd be completely shocked. He had the most unbelievable handle I ever saw in my life. And I'm talking Isaiah Thomas. You throw anybody you want out there. Pearl, who was a great. This guy's handle was nobody's approached him. So Rod was a great player. Obviously, if you're going to win a championship, you got to have good players, as you know, Chuck and Sonny. And, he was a tremendous player. He was a junior. He was just coming into his own. And we were fortunate to win the city and state championship his junior year.
Now, so you win the championship. And then the following year, you're with us at Villanova, right? So how did that happen?
It's a crazy thing, Chuck, because, I wanted to get into Division I coaching, while I was all those years when I was coaching in high school. I wanted to get into Division I. I was writing letters all over the country to, schools to be a graduate assistant, Lafayette, Lehigh, schools in California. I would take anything. I just wanted to get into the business so bad. And I was very fortunate that I got a chance to meet. I worked at Coach Massimino's camp, and I got a chance to meet him. And then when we had Rod Strickland, he came up to Truman High School to talk to me about recruiting him. And then we really had a good conversation going. And, Paul Cormier leaves to go to Dartmouth. And right. I'll never forget, Mitch calls me, Bonaguro calls me and says, hey, we got a job open. It doesn't pay much, pays like $6,000. Would you be interested? I said, interested. I had to be the only guy in America that would give I was ready to give a party and take a 1/3 pay cut, because that's how much it was. But the funny thing was, Chuck, I interviewed with Coach Massimino. I'll never forget. We met at the Princeton Diner, the Princetonian Diner in Princeton, New Jersey. And, we had a great meeting. He says, oh, I want you to bring your wife down to my house Sunday. So I'm like, I've been writing letters to like Columbia, Lehigh, Lafayette. Now I'm going to go to Villanova with like one of the top 5 coaches in the country. And, the program, John Pannone, Villanova, before we won the title, was a major, major program in the country. And obviously winning the title changed things, but major program. Yeah. I was like, he says, I want you to come down with your wife. and meet my wife and all. We spent 8 hours at his house that Sunday. I'll never forget. And he says, listen, I'll call you this week. So I said, this is unbelievable. I'm not going to Columbia or Lafayette as assistant. I got a chance to go to Villanova. This is ridiculous. He doesn't call. He doesn't call 1 week. He doesn't call 2 weeks. He doesn't call. Now I'm freaking out. I'm like, I thought it was my job, to be honest with you. Now I'm thinking, got to be somebody else involved. Finally, I get up the guts to call Coach Massimino. You know, Chuck, that took some guts, believe me.
Yep.
So I call him and I say, I'm just curious. I'm trying to soft shoot this thing. I don't want to, is there any chance you know what you're going to do? He said, I'll call you next week. So I'm like freaking out because now I know there's something else about.
I heard this.
He calls me the next week. He says, I'm going to hire somebody else. I was devastated. He was going to hire Jerry Wainwright. I don't know if you guys know Jerry Wainwright. He's been in basketball forever. And in the end, Jerry Wainwright decides to turn the job down. And Coach Massimino calls me back. I'll never forget. I bought an answering machine. And in those days, it was like the answering machines were like a novel. I said, I got to get an answering machine. So I don't want to miss this call. And my wife calls me and says, I got this message. I think it's Coach Massimino. And it was like, he said this, you damn Greek. He said, call me back. I said, yeah. He didn't even say it was Coach Massimino. I was like, that's all he said. That sounds like him, right, Chuck?
Oh, absolutely.
So, and I said, I think that's Coach Mass. And I call him back and he says, hey, you still want the job? I said, want the job? Yeah, I want the job. So that's how I ended up with you guys at Villanova.
Wow. I never heard that before. That's unbelievable.
And I got it on the rebound. Somebody turned it down, and that's how I ended up there. And the truth is, there's no way I would have had the opportunity to do the things I've done, be the head coach at the places I've been, do TV now, if he didn't give me that opportunity at that time. It changed my life. There's no doubt about it.
So, Coach, second letter you got to write is a thank you to Coach Wainwright. That's 2.
There's no doubt that needs to be done also. And me and Jerry have spoken about that over the years, and Jerry did fine. Jerry did fine. He was a head coach in a number of places, an assistant forever. And we've been friends. We were 5-star friends for the longest time. So, it's just the way things work out sometimes in life. That's kind of how it goes.
There's something for everybody. I believe that.
Yeah, no doubt.
So you get there, right? So you take the job. What are your first thoughts? You're driving. Did you live there?
Well, no, me and my wife lived in Jackson Heights, Queens. My wife is from Jackson Heights, Queens, and I was from Manhattan, and we lived in Queens the first 2 years we were married. To me, Queens was like the suburbs. Yeah. Like, what I mean? I was living in Manhattan. I grew up in a 6-story walk-up. We didn't have a car. We lived the normal city life of city kids. Yeah. And we lived in Jackson Heights the first 2 years we were married. So, leaving there to go to Villanova, it was the first time either one of us left New York. We didn't go to, she went to NYU. I went to CCNY. I commuted to school, never left home in my life. She never left home in her life. So going to Villanova for the two of us together was a big thing leaving New York.
So you're leaving, right? So you're leaving your hometown, your home area, and you're going to Philly, and you're taking a major pay cut. What was the discussion? I mean, obviously your wife was supportive, but what happened as you get on and you start to settle in? What's your first thoughts as you begin your new job?
Well, first of all, I know I'm working at one of the top, at that time, 15, 20 programs in the country. I know I'm working for a coach who's one of the top 5 coaches in America that time. He'd already been to 3 Elite Eights before that year. So I know, one thing about this business, you get in this business, you really never know if you're going to have a chance to be a head coach. Everybody wants to be a head coach, but you never know if you're going to be a head coach, especially if you're not working for a high-level guy. If you're working for a guy like Coach Massimino, it's not whether you're going to, it's probably a matter of time. And it's really got nothing to do with who you are. It's like I tell people all the time, when I got hired at Manhattan College, they were not hiring Steve Lappas. They were hiring Rolly Massimino's assistant. And that's what you always have to keep. Yeah, I had to interview. I had to do all that stuff. Yes, no doubt about it. But they hired Rolly Massimino's assistant. That's the key thing. So getting that opportunity to work for a guy like him. And let me tell you this, and I said this story the other day. When I got to Villanova, man, did I realize quickly what I did not know about basketball. In our meetings, Coach Mass would sit there with Marty and Mitch, and literally they would be diagramming plays. And before I could figure out where the first pass went, they were erasing it and doing another one. And I was like, oh my God, I had no idea what's going on here. Zero. So, when you're a high school coach, you don't really X and O a lot. You don't have assistants. You just kind of do what you do. You're not scouting. You're not doing all this. And what I learned, and I tell my son this, because he asked me, he's the same age. He's 30 years old. I was 30 when I got the assistant's job at Villanova. And he asked me, he said, okay, at a similar stage, where were you and me? I said, here's what I'll tell you. At 30, you knew a lot more than me when I was a high school coach. But I got a PhD course in 4 years that nobody could get, because Rolly Massimino was going to teach you basketball because he was an X and O guy. And he wanted to sit in that office and he wanted to think and talk and X and O and diagram, offense, defense. And if you weren't ready to learn quick, you were in big trouble. So I realized very fast what I didn't know, but I also caught on. And you know what? I tell my son all the time, you have to know what you don't know. Because if you don't know what you don't know, you're never going to learn what you need to know. Right. And that's what I learned quickly from Rolly is, guess what? I got a long way to go here, and I'm going to learn this stuff quick. And I picked it up, but let me tell you something. The beginning was really tough because I had no idea what this. I was driving him. I wasn't allowed to recruit my first year. I was considered the restricted earnings coach.
That's what I was going to ask you, what your title was. Yeah.
I was the restricted earnings coach. How about this? We were recruiting Doug West in Altoona, Pennsylvania. I was driving Coach Massimino and Marty Marbach to Altoona like 3 days a week, 3.5 hours each way. Now, you got to understand, prior to becoming a Villanova, if I drove 3.5 hours somewhere, I was staying for a week. I wasn't going back and forth. I didn't know what you mean? We're going to drive 3.5 hours and then we're going to come right back and we're going to do it again like in 2 days. I couldn't fathom what that was, but I learned quick. And like I said, when you don't grow up doing that, you think, if I'm going to drive, like I said, I would drive 3.5 hours. I was staying for a week, not going back and forth and going back in 2 days. So there's things that you learn about the business and what needed to be done. And with one thing about Coach Mass, you would drive and you'd have to, I couldn't go in the house or I couldn't go watch the kid because I was restricted earnings. So I'd wait outside and then they'd come like an hour and a half later. We'd go to a restaurant and eat. We always ate. And then 3 o'clock in the morning, we'd get back. And 8 o'clock, we had to be in the office. Wow. My first year was tough. Tough adjustment. Tough.
But on those rides, did you get part of your education on the conversation?
No question. But you know what? One thing about Coach Massimino, he was tough. And when he was in a bad mood, get out of the way. But when he was in a good mood, you had so much fun. It was ridiculous. So we with Coach Mass, you got everything. You got, we would say to ourselves as assistants, if he comes in the morning and his hair's kind of messed up, stay out of the way. If he comes in the morning and he says hello to you in your office, it's going to be a good day. You just didn't know what to expect and you were ready for everything.
So you come in and you inherit Marty's, I don't know what it was that he was driving. And you get that, yes, you're the kind of the low man on the totem pole, that Chevrolet or whatever heck he was driving, Impala. That burnt orange.
1968 Impala.
Chevy Impala, that's right. That's some
road mobile
seen on that car. Holy smokes. Yeah.
There's some matches in the back.
And now you're the bottom guy. And like every other freshman, if you will, or rookie, Sonny, we had a thing at pregame, all right, where we had to sing for our dinner, our supper. Okay. All the freshmen had to sing. If you were a coach, you were no different. And I have to say, and he's standing, not because he's sitting here, Steve stole the show. I mean, there were some horrible singers, and my good pal Wyatt Maker was probably the worst. He tried to sing Eye of the Tiger, and he got so nervous, he wrote the words on his hand, and he sweated them off. So he had to sing the Brady Bunch. Steve did a rendition of My Girl, The Temptations, that would knock your socks off. It was so good that every time we had a meal, we would coax them to get back up and sing again.
I guess you say what can make me feel this way. My girl, talking about
And I'm not going to ask you to sing, Steve. Don't worry. But
Please.
holy cow, he
Got
was
some
good.
soul.
Talk about those the pre-games and stuff, Steve.
You know, it was a great memory and a great tradition. It's a tradition that I took with me when I went to Manhattan and I went back to Villanova that I kept all those years. I thought it was a great tradition. The new guy, the freshman, has to sing. Whether you got a new assistant, he's got to sing. You got all freshmen, they got to sing. And my first year at Manhattan, when I was at my first head coaching job, everybody was new. So everybody had to sing, including me and the other assistant coaches. And I don't know if you remember, Chuck, I think it was Lou Dobbs. They had my girl doing on one of these news shows one night too. I had the tape somewhere.
Right.
But, that was a great memory. I tell you what else I remember. I remember you guys and Presley kind of started it, I think. When you remember when Mr. Cotter was on in those days, you guys would sing, "Welcome Lap, welcome Lap, welcome Lap."
That's right.
I remember
That's
it
right.
like it was yesterday.
That's right.
So when you get there, your first year is 85.
Yeah, good timing.
How about that? How about that? So you get there, and you must think at this point, well, this is normal. We go to the final. We go to the NCAA Final Four, and you're in it. What was the Big East like to you? Were you just overwhelmed with just the job, or did the Big East have like a bigger shadow for you when you started?
I was a little overwhelmed. There's no doubt, and you got to understand. My first year, scouting was tough because Coach Mass was like crazy about getting every single play right. And one of the many things that I learned from him was when you talk to the team, he didn't want you having any notes. So if you were doing the scouting report and that team had 12 plays, them 12 plays better be in your head. He didn't want you looking at notes. I mean, the things that he taught me that I tell my son, there were unbelievable lessons. And this is how I ran my program. I tell my assistants, you do a scouting report on the floor, no notes. You better know everything that you have. If it's 14 plays, you better know them 14 plays by heart. So and I think that gives confidence to the players. When the assistants know that kind of stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
The players feel good about it too. So, but it wasn't like that for me right away. I had to learn. I wasn't ready for that. I got ready, there's no question, and I worked at it so I could get ready. But my first year was, I would get the sneakers, get the coffee. Rolly used to like this particular cheese. I used to drive 2 hours to get the cheese for him. You know what I mean? Whatever he needed, I was going to do, whether it was basketball, because it's not like now. Now there's like 9 assistants, graduate assistants, video guys. In those days, there were 3 of us. That's it. Marty and Mitch recruited, and I did everything else. And so it was a different time. But, coming into the Big East was like, for growing up in New York, I was a St. John's fan my whole life. I was a kid, 12, 13 years old. I go to Madison Square Garden. You'd pay $2 with your high school ID card, and you'd go see St. John's play. So I watched St. John's and Manhattan, all those guys play in the Garden forever. So being in the Big East was like a dream come true. And then to top it off, here I am. I was looking to be an assistant anywhere in the country, and here we are. Playing North Carolina to go to the Final Four. And I'll never forget. We're sitting in the hallway outside the locker room before the game. And who's walking down the hallway? Dean Smith. Now, Dean Smith was like an idol to me. You know what I mean? I was a high school coach. And I'll never forget, he comes up and he says, "Hey, Rolly, how are you?" And he knew Marty, he knew Mitch. And he didn't know me, but he said, "Hey, coach." I was like, can you imagine? Dean Smith is calling me coach. That's like it's like a dream come true. So this whole thing for me, my first year, and then to go to the Final Four and win a national championship, I was like, how does this happen? But it happened.
Right off a city championship too, and a state title in high school.
Yeah, I mean,
so it was like,
and that stuff was great, no question. But
but I mean, you just step right from championship to championship. At that point, you got to say, hey, this is, like Sonny said, this is pretty easy. You know?
Yeah, that's what I said. I said to Coach Mass after we won the championship, boy, it's got to be all downhill from here. Because,
I'm just here to win titles, baby.
Yeah. And I never forget. I walked with Coach Mass to the press conference after we won, and I was joking. I said, "Coach, what's so hard about this?" And he punched me. He threw one of those punches at me in the arm, like, you know what I mean? Yeah, oh yeah. What's so hard about this? I said, "Yeah, it don't seem that hard. My first year we did this."
What were some of your best memories of the Final Four, Steve? I know there's an iconic, when we win the whole thing, you were the first guy to get to coach and give him a big bear hug. I remember that. What were some of your best memories from the Final Four?
In a lot of ways, Chuck, and I don't know if you guys feel the same way. It's like a surreal memory. You know what I mean? Like, you have these memories and you say to yourself, did that really happen? I do remember halftime when you had the altercation with Reggie Williams and how fired up Coach was at halftime when he ran off the court, pumping his fist. And, I remember the pasta speech, at North Carolina. And, when we were getting beat at halftime, I remember the parade like it was yesterday. I mean, I said, for me, I was a high school coach who was just wanted to be in Division I anywhere. If you had told me you're going to be an assistant at Lehigh, I'd have been excited. And I every year, I tell this story, and this is the truth. Every year, we used to give a little party for the Final Four when I was coaching in high school. I had my friends over, we'd watch the games. And I'll never forget in 1984, after we won the state championship, watching the Final Four that year saying, man, what I wouldn't give to have a ticket to go to the Final Four. And 1 year later, I'm sitting on the bench. And I'm like, if somebody told me a year ago in my house in Jackson Heights, next April, you're going to be sitting on the bench next to Rolly Massimino winning a national championship, I said, that's impossible. That can't happen. But that's what happened. So it was the whole thing, the going to the White House. I'm like, I'm going to the White House. I mean, are you kidding me? Well, I grew up in Washington Heights. My father was a florist. He came from Greece as an immigrant when he was 15 years old. I was a half-ass player. I'm going to the White House. I mean, the whole thing was just a surreal experience in every way.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it really was. It really was. And with that group of guys, too. I mean, those guys, that was a different kind of team. Those guys are very close. Even to this day, we're still very close, as you know.
And you know what the funny thing, Chuck, was? We didn't have a great year. Right. As you know, we kind of underachieved. We were good, but we weren't as good as I think people expected us to be. We, got in as when you're an at-large and you get in at that low a seed, you were towards the end of the tournament in terms of selection. So, it's just funny. And I used to tell people that, and I talk about this a lot now that I'm broadcasting. People say, well, you got to have momentum coming into the tournament. I said, no, you don't. I had two teams that had we won in 1995, we won like 14 games in a row in that league. And we lost in the first round of the NCAA tournament. So my point is you need momentum during the tournament, not coming into the tournament. Forget that coming in stuff. The momentum is gained in the tournament. And I think us beating Dayton, the way we beat them at Dayton that year, started to feel a little better. Then obviously the Michigan game, I think that was the big one that got us feeling good and going. If you ask me for the key game, I think Michigan was the key game for. Obviously, we had to make that. Prez makes that steal and Jensen makes that layup at the end of the Dayton game, or this doesn't happen. But that's how you create momentum. You create momentum during the tournament, not before.
I agree.
So, Coach, when did you go into a bigger assistant role? At what year did you go from the limited earnings or the restricted earnings coach to a full-time assistant?
Well, that's a good question, Sonny. So, after my first year, Mitch Bonagura left, and
he took the head job, right?
He took the head job at Fairfield. And I wanted to get moved up in the worst way, and I'll never forget how devastated I was when Coach Mass decided to bring John Olive in, who played for him, was his first recruit at Villanova, and kept me in the job I was in. And I was devastated. But I was devastated, but I was not deterred. And I was determined my second year to be 1,000% different. If I wasn't going to be the second guy on the staff, I was going to try and be the second guy on the staff in every way, even though I wasn't getting paid that way. That was my goal, that I was going to be somebody that Coach Mass could rely on. I didn't like it, but I understood. I was only there I got there in August. Mitch left in April. And now, was Coach Mass comfortable hiring me into one of those top 2 spots? He wasn't. He brought John Oliver. Fine. I didn't like it, but I accepted it. And I was going to do whatever I could to show him that this is not going to happen again.
Right.
And then Marty left to go to Canisius. So 2 years later. And when Marty left, then I moved up. So it was I only recruited at Villanova for 1 year. My 4th year, I was now elevated into that position. Marty left. Jay came in as the bottom assistant on that staff.
I was going to ask us, you and Jay overlapped, right? Yeah.
Yes, we were together 1 year. And that year, was a big year for me in terms of responsibility, recruiting, doing everything. So, and I'm one of the lucky ones. I was only an assistant for 4 years before I got a chance to become a head coach.
Yeah, that was meteoric if you think about it. 1 year as a full-time assistant, the other is limited earnings. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt. So
Big
jumps. I made the jump, and I was 34 when I became the head coach at Manhattan College. But again, I grew up in New York City, so I had ties. I coached in the Bronx, Manhattan College in the Bronx. I'm Rolly Massimino's assistant. We won the title. We went to the Elite Eight in '88. For Manhattan College, whether it was Steve Lappas or Joe Schmo, it was a guy, whoever was Rolly's assistant at that time, they probably would have hired. It happened to be me. Now, the fact that I grew up in New York City probably helped, no doubt. But I'll never forget, Coach Mans told me, you can't take that job. That's a horrendous. He didn't want me to leave. And he thought that was a bad, and it was they were last in Division I. They had won 70 games in the 10 years before I got there. And Rolly said, you crazy, you're going to go there, you're nuts. And he gave me a list of like 10 things. You tell them they got to do all these things or you're not going. And I had a meeting with the athletic director and I gave him these 10 things and he did every one. And,
wow.
And Coach Matt still said, you shouldn't go, whatever. But I said, Coach, they're going to do them all and they stink. We can't go nowhere but up. And my last year there, we won 25 games.
25-9. Yeah. I mean, you took your first year, I think you was 7-21, Steve.
Oh, yeah.
And then,
we were bad.
And then, so how did you, now the buzzword is culture. We never used that word, but that's what it was back then as well. How did you change the culture that was there in a short period of time and in 4 years go from 7-21 to 25-9? Pretty impressive.
Number one with me, Chuck, I wasn't good with guys I inherited. I just wasn't. And I feel bad about I probably had some nice kids that I inherited, and I just wasn't good with guys I inherited. I needed my guys. And the first thing I did was recruit a freshman class of 5 guys that were going to be my guys. And they built the program. Those guys they're all in the Manhattan College Hall of Fame. They helped me change the culture. And really, when you want to change culture, what's it about? I think it's about accountability. Everything, you're accountable for everything. We're not accepting this. And obviously you need talent. There's no doubt. Let's understand that. You have to have talent. Yeah. But it's about the coach not accepting mediocrity. And I think that's what culture is. You develop a culture by not accepting mediocrity. And when you do that, and everybody knows they have to perform at a higher standard, maybe even a higher standard they're capable of, that's how you create a culture. And then the winning begets winning. And it's not easy to do, to create that culture. You need some luck. And let me tell you something, luck is a factor in sports. I don't care what anybody says. It's got to bounce a certain way, no doubt about it. But having that culture, the accountability, to me is the biggest thing. And getting guys that welcome being coached, welcome accountability. That's what you need.
So were you able to get some guys that maybe normally were not going to go to Manhattan, or did you just have you could just get guys that had a flavor that you knew you could work with?
Well, the funny thing, Sonny, is, people nowadays think, at Manhattan College, you got to get New York kids. Well, the program was so bad then, nobody from New York would come. So I got 3 kids from Connecticut and 1 from Philadelphia, my first recruiting class. And the 3 kids from Connecticut, Mitch Bonaguro at Fairfield was recruiting them all. And we were able to get these 3 kids, and they were not recruited at a higher level. They were our level. It's not like they were steals. They were steals in terms of how good they became. I don't think people thought they were that good, but we didn't steal them from Syracuse or from, St. John's or somebody. No, we didn't steal. We beat other schools in the MAC for them. And they turned out, Keith Bullock ended up being the player of the year 2 years in a row in the league. Kerry Edwards was an all-league player. Kerry Wilson was a great player. Chris Williams from Philadelphia was and then we backed it up with other recruiting classes, but they were the guys that started it. They were the guys that took us but let me tell you something. We had some hard times. I'll never forget. We got drilled. We went up to Siena when these guys were freshmen, and we got killed. And I'll never forget. They were looking at me like I was crazy. So we get back from Albany. It's like midnight, 12:30, whatever it was. And I said, all right, go in and get taped. And they were looking at me like I was nuts. We practiced after. Now, you can't do that nowadays against the law, against the rules. But then you could. I said, all right. They thought I was going to say, all right, tomorrow practice at 3:00. I said, go get taped. What? Get taped at 12:30? Yeah, we just played. Yeah, get taped now.
That's a rolly move. Right?
That is a rolly move.
That's how you learn. And the other thing that I did, Coach Mass may have done this too, but there were times that I didn't like the way practice was going. We'd be practicing for 2 hours. It was a bad practice. And I would tell them, okay, let's stretch, which we did in the beginning. So we're going to start all over. Okay, so start stretching now. We're going to start all over. Those are the kind of things that's what helps you develop a culture. But you know what? You can't do those things if you don't have good communication. Those kids knew me. They trusted me. And that's the biggest thing. If they don't trust you and they don't respect you, you can do all this kind of stuff. It'll never work. But if they trust you and they respect you, then these things have meaning and they work.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's exactly those 2 big things. That's huge in any kind of coach, no matter what kind of team you're coaching.
Communication. People ask me to this day, so what's the most important thing in leadership? I went and spoke at a school the other day. I said, number 1, the leader being able to communicate his ideas and have the people he's leading blind faith. If you can get blind faith in the people that you're leading, you got it. Get them. If they really think that you care about them and that what you're saying is going to help them and is right, now you got something. That's what you need.
So now, Coach, you're at Manhattan. You turned the program around in 4 short years, and now you find yourself with an opportunity to go back to Villanova as the head guy. Coach Mass leaves and goes to UNLV. How did that go? Take me on the story from that point. How did you get involved with that?
Well, you know what? It was a crazy story. It was a crazy story because Ted Aceto was the athletic director then, who has since passed away.
Yeah.
And he originally wanted to get Pete Gillen, who was one of Roley's assistants. They wanted Pete Gillen. So, and I'll never forget, I was distraught that, they weren't really interested in me initially. They wanted Pete Gillen, and then Pete Gillen turned the job down. And that's when everything kind of happened really quickly for me to have a chance to coach at, obviously one of the best basketball schools period in the country. But yeah, it was kind of like the Jerry Wainwright thing. I wasn't the first choice, but I really didn't care at that point. Just wanted to be the choice.
Yeah. Imagine that, but as an assistant, you got the job that way. And as the head coach, you got the job that way. The amazing thing is nobody wants to leave that place, Steve. I mean, we've at Villanova, I think they've only been am I right? Is it 7 head coaches in almost 100 years? It's 7 or 8 coaches. That's it.
Well, you think of it between, Al Severance. I don't know about before Al Severance, but between
Jack
Al
Kraft,
Severance,
Al Severance, UJ, and Coach Mass.
it's
right?
like 8 years right there, and I left because truthfully, we struggled. The NCAA tournament hurt me. What happened, the year we lost to Old Dominion in triple overtime, we were the best team we could have been the best team in the country that year, and we lose in triple overtime to Old Dominion in the first round of the tournament after beating Connecticut by 25 in the Big East championship game.
Yeah.
So, we just never had a chance to do well in the NCAA tournament. And at a school like Villanova, where the tradition is what it is, that doesn't really, and you know what? I always tell people this. I said, if you're the captain of the ship at what's considered probably, I think if you ask most Villanovans, what's the most disappointing loss in the history of the school? I'm going to say Old Dominion is going to be up there in the top 2.
Yeah.
Probably. And when you're the captain of the ship in a game like that, it's not the easiest thing to overcome. And that's, hey, I'm not taking anything away from Jay and what he's done. He's been, he's a Hall of Famer, and he's done an unbelievable job without a doubt. But, when you're the captain of the ship and you get and you know what? We missed a layup at the end of regulation. We missed a layup at the end of the first overtime.
Right.
That game, we could have won in a second. And that team was good enough to win a national championship. No doubt. Good enough. Then the next year.
Who was some of you guys on that team, Steve? Refresh my memory.
Al, the starters,
Al, right?
Jonathan Haynes, Kerry Kittles.
Yep, that was Kerry's team, yeah.
Jason Lawson.
There's 3 pros right there with Al, Kerry, and Jason, right?
Ron Wilson, Chuck Cornegay.
Yeah, that was a good squad.
Oh, it was a real,
Was Eric on that team too? Eberts?
Eric Ebers, Eric goes 1 for 10 that game. It happens, Here's a guy who scored 1,500 points. He didn't miss a shot like you felt like all year, and he didn't have a great game. It just happens, Kerry didn't have a great game. And you know what? We had just beaten UConn on Sunday in the Big East championship game. First Big East championship in the history of the school. You beat UConn by 25 points. Now, Friday, emotionally, we got to get geared up. And we were flat. There's no doubt we were flat. If we get by that game, I don't know what could have happened, to be honest with you. But that team was good enough to win a national championship. We missed a couple of layups at the end of regulation, layup at the end of the first overtime. If we make those layups, who knows? I don't know.
Yeah, you know what? I'm looking at some not only the games. You won the NIT in what, 94?
My second year.
Second year, yeah, and that was I know Kerry was on that team too. You had, I'm going to name a few guys. Talk about a little bit about each guy. You had some pros, man, and you had 7 pros that played there while you were there.
Yeah, no doubt. You
had Timmy Thomas, pretty good player.
Yeah, really good player and a great kid. One thing I'll tell you about all those kids, they were great kids. I mean, Kerry, I inherited, and Kerry didn't want, when I got the job, Coach Mass recruited him and signed him, and then I get the job. He didn't want to come. I had to go to New Orleans twice to convince him to try it, and he didn't want to come because he didn't know. He was like, who is this guy from Manhattan College? First of all, he was from New Orleans, so he had no idea who I was, and he didn't want to come. I had to re-recruit him. So he was Alvin Williams was a Philly kid who, was good friends with Jason Lawson and good friends with Rasheed Wallace and good friends with Jonathan Haynes. We had a good shot at Alvin, another kid. And I don't think Alvin came to us as a pro. I think he became a pro because of things that we did with him, and he improved and he loved them. One thing about Alvin Williams, and I say this all the time, Alvin Williams and Jason Lawson and Jonathan Haynes, those 3 guys, I don't know if I've ever coached any guys that love to play more than those 3 guys. Yeah. They love, people think, wow, you're a great player. You love to play. No, that's not true. There are great players that just have a lot of talent. Those 3 guys, they would play at if you told them here, you don't have to play for the next 6 months. They're going to play at midnight in the gym. That's how they were. And that's one of the reasons why they became who they were. They were just really guys that love to play basketball, and they were tremendous players. And then you had, Eric Ebers was 1,500 points in his career. Malik Allen was a kid who didn't play his first 2 years and played 10 years in the NBA, who stuck with it. If this was today, Malik Allen probably would have left after his freshman year if you could transfer anytime you wanted. But he stayed, and he ends up playing in the NBA 10 years. Then, we also had
John, you had Celestin.
John Celestin played for
Mike
Lakers.
Bradley for a year.
Mike Bradley had an unbelievable year. The 1 year that I had Mike. Tim Thomas, obviously, he's made a lot of money and is a tremendous. And one thing about all these guys, great. I get texts on Father's Day from these guys. Happy Father's Day. So, I mean, for me, the kids that I got a chance to coach at Villanova, Howard Brown, who we didn't even talk about, great kid. John
Great guy.
We had so many. I don't want to leave anybody out. You know what I
Right.
mean? Guys that.
Yeah, well, I
love
got to
those
tell
guys.
you, Steve, and my relationship with the program. Those guys are always coming around. Howard's doing great. He just had a double hip replacement. So I was talking to him through that because Dwayne and I both had, that surgery. And, all those guys, they still come around. Eric's always around. Al's always around. In fact, Al made one of the trips down to Florida to see Coach Mass with us. So when we went down, when the 85 team went down, I hooked up. In fact, Sonny was with me. We went to the Syracuse Villanova game at Wells Fargo, and we ran into Al at the Xfinity Center. We started talking, and he said, "Hey, you know what I would really like? I would love to be able to come on one of those trips, just to be a fly on the wall to see what that was like." And he did. He came down and hung out with us. It was great. He fit right in with that crew.
Oh, no doubt.
That's not easy. That's not easy to take that kind of ball busting. Steve. You know that. So, I mean,
let me ask you this, Coach. When you got the head job, Roley was leaving, right? So what was that like? Here's an icon, loved, moving. He's moving on, which probably nobody ever foresaw that. And now you're the next guy. Now, probably if you have no Villanova connections, it's even harder. But what were you feeling when you had that put upon your shoulders?
It was not an easy time, to replace a guy like Coach Mass. And this is the nature of the business. The nature of the business is, when Coach Mass left Villanova, we look back now in 2021 and say, well, this guy was an icon, which he was, and this guy should be in the Naismith Hall of Fame, which he should be. There's no doubt. But at that time, believe it or not, Villanova people were a little this way and that way about Coach. Right. They had a couple of NIT years, his last, couple of years. And, that's one thing about this business. Everything's fleeting. They forget about 85. They forgot about the Elite Eight. They forgot all the Elite Eights that he went to. And now the last couple of years, they were a little down on him. So, and I think that's why he left to go to UNLV because he was feeling unloved. And he was right. And that's why he left. He could have stayed. He could have stayed at Villanova for the rest of his career, but he probably would have had to go through some ups and downs while he was doing it. But he would have gotten it back to winning the way he wanted to win and doing the things that he wanted to do. So when I came in, believe it or not, some people were like, hey, it's time for Roley to go somewhere else, which sounds crazy. But that was the fact at the time. That's what happened. So, coming in, but when you follow a legend, it's never easy, especially a legend who had that kind of success in the NCAA tournament. And then we had a lot of great put it this way, when I left Villanova, I was the 6th winningest coach in the history of the Big East Conference. And the guys ahead of me, name was John Thompson, Calhoun, Carnesecca, those guys. So we won a lot of Big East games in the regular season, but we did not win the tournament, which obviously was the biggest thing. And that's why it was time for me to hit the road when I hit the road.
Okay. Yeah. Now if
you want me to be honest, this is what happened.
No. I can imagine because, I get what you're saying. There was a little, success fatigue, right?
People were those last couple of years that Coach Mass was at Villanova, and I don't know if Chuck could attest to it, but people were down on him because of an NIT. But that's the way this business is. If Mike Krzyzewski goes to 2 NITs, they're going to do the same thing to him. Believe me, it got nothing to do with Rolly Massimino. It's just the way the business is, and so. People say, he's getting stale, whatever. That's what they do. And you know what I mean? When things don't go the way fans want it to go. That's
Especially in Philadelphia, right, Steve? I mean, the city of brotherly love. There,
Yeah.
you know, it's what have you done lately in Philadelphia?
You know, let's face it. Coach Massimino is one of the greatest coaches in the history of college basketball. He should be in the Hall of Fame. But people, you know, and let me tell you something. Jay has done what Jay has done, which is unbelievable. If Jay goes to 2 NITs in a row, they're going to be saying he's stale. That's just the way it goes.
Well, listen, they were looking to get rid of him.
Great.
They were looking to get rid of him in 2015 when we lost to NC State, and he's taking questions on why he left a certain kid in the game, and he should have taken this kid out and put this kid in, and they were calling for his head back then. All of a sudden, Jenkins makes a shot and everything's cool. So
that's the way the business is, Chuck. And same thing happened to me. I just, I wasn't able to stay long enough to have those great moments. And, we had some opportunities that didn't happen. And all of a sudden, it's time to move on.
Okay. So when you were there, talk about the culture of the Big East. What were some of the matchups and the teams that you played against in that era?
Well,
I think your top teams were, Syracuse, Georgetown, right?
Yeah, I mean, UConn, Syracuse,
yeah.
Georgetown, UConn. Pitt had some good teams then. Allen Iverson was in the Big East in those days. Like, people ask me, who's the best player you ever coached against? I said, as a head coach, Allen Iverson. As an assistant coach, Patrick Ewing. But, in my career, Patrick Ewing's the best player I ever coached against, assistant or head coach. As a head coach, Allen Iverson was the best player. I'll never forget, we were playing them in D.C., and it was an early game. We had an early conference game. It was in December, and we're playing Georgetown, and he's a freshman. No, he's a sophomore. And Alvin Williams was going to guard him. And I'll never forget, before the game, you got the guys all huddled up, and I'm saying, okay, Al, here's what you got to do with him. You got to do this, 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 and this. He goes out to the court. I turned to my assistant and said, just pray that dude misses, because you couldn't stop him. It was like, you didn't stop him. He was going to miss. If he missed, you're happy. But there was nothing you could do to make him not get a shot that he wanted. That's how good Allen Iverson was, who goes on as 5'10" and leads the NBA in scoring like 7 years in a row. That's how good he was. So, it was the big, Ray Allen was at UConn in those days. Yeah. You guys had John Wallace and guys like that. I mean, it was just the Big East in those days, in the 90s, the 80s and 90s. The players were, and I'm not saying the players aren't good. They are really good, no doubt. But those days were a little different, and there was just some great, tremendous teams and coaches. I'm sitting in my first coaches meeting in 1992. It was John Thompson, Jim Boeheim, Rick Barnes, PJ Carlesimo. I mean, it was like a who's who in coaching. So it was just an unbelievable experience.
Great.
What were the big differences and similarities, though, in the style of play from the 80s to the 90s? Was it very similar, or was it, you think it was a little more physical in one decade versus the other? Or
I think the 80s and the 90s were relatively similar. I think things really changed in the 2000s, when, what people are doing with the basketball in general now is about, how many threes you make. Guys like you that were posting up nowadays, how many guys are there like that now? Yeah, you got the kid Coffee Corburn at Illinois, but there aren't a whole lot of guys that kid Drew Timmy at Gonzaga, guys that can make moves in the low post. Doesn't exist anymore, because it's about going out and shooting as many threes as you can. That's where the analytics.
Chuck would be a stretch four. He'd be a stretch four.
he knows. Coach wouldn't let me shoot past the dotted line. Are you kidding
me?
No,
yeah. No. Chuck wasn't going out there, Sonny. I can tell you that. But, that's how the game in the 80s and 90s was totally not a lot different. Probably more physical in the 80s. And then, and now you even see with the referees, I go to these clinics now because I'm broadcasting, and, it's about freedom of movement. There was no freedom of movement back in those days. No. Who could you chuck the hardest and who could you hit the most? So the game has changed in that regard. And, it's evolved so that the refereeing is is there to allow people to score more and not be as physical and shoot more threes, and that's what it is.
There was always talk. The one thing I remember them talking about was making the lane a European lane, and it never came to fruition. But
that's gonna. But I'll tell you what, that trapezoid is coming. I think it's coming. They talk about it every year. It's not dead. I think at some point that lane is going to get widened. I do think that.
I don't see what the change is now. I mean, there's nobody in there anyway.
Nobody's in there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know what they want is they want to be able to allow more people. They want the floor more opened up. They want less congestion in the lane. It makes for less fouls. It makes for more penetration. It allows for more space. And that's what the game is about nowadays. It's about space, shoot threes, or make free throws. That's it. The in-between is gone.
Yeah, I think they should be 1 3-point line. That's my suggestion. One, no NBA, no, just one. That's it. And that's where it is.
That's who knows? We may get to that point at some point.
So Steve, couple more and we'll wrap it up. So now you're calling games, you're an analyst, you're involved with the game. What's it like prepping for a weekend game that you have to go to now versus when you were a coach?
It's very similar. Obviously the preparation is not as intense. You're doing it by yourself. You're not like I used to talk to my staff. I would make my staff watch. Like some guys have one assistant do a game. I used to have all my assistants in there watching tape when we were getting ready for a game. Now, obviously, but I watch tape of every team that I'm doing, at least one game. I do my own research, and now it's a lot easier. I can't even imagine what it was like 25 years ago, but with the internet and all that stuff, it's easy to do research nowadays. You can do everything on an iPad. But I watch, and we have a website that's got every single game that's played is on TV somewhere, whether it's ESPN3, whether it's some local thing. So every game that I do, I'm able to watch tape of that team, their previous game. So I always watch the previous game. If I don't see what I want, I'll watch 2 games, and then I'll do my charts. I'd say it probably takes me 8 hours to get ready for one game, to do it the way I want to do it. Between watching tape, doing my charts, knowing all my stats, it probably takes 8 hours to do one game.
Do you have the Bill Raftery legal pad?
I got my own thing that I use, my own charts that I do. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I heard you say charts.
Raf's the best. Raf's the best. He does his thing. I do what makes me comfortable, and it's kind of how it goes.
At least he's not using the bar napkins, right? That's a good thing.
Yeah, right.
You might use those once in a while.
Exactly. So you're enjoying this part of your career, Steve? I mean, still being around the game. Do you miss the guys? Do you miss that type of stuff, or is it just different now for you?
No, I miss the guys. I miss my assistants. I miss practice, no doubt. I miss being part of a team. I miss when I see a team like celebrating in the locker room after a win. It's like, that's what I really miss. That high that you get from winning a game and being in that locker room after the game, like a road win. I mean, road wins were like the greatest thing ever. There's no better feeling than that. To do than what you do to get a road win is like the craziest thing ever. So that great feeling that you get from being with your guys and winning a game, that's something you can't get. So I miss that. I miss that big time. I miss practice. I miss hanging with my assistants. I love sitting with my assistants and talking basketball. Loved it. Yeah. Don't have that. But it's funny because people ask me all the time. They say, what do you miss? I say, well, after a game, I'll say, I miss not feeling like that guy, and I'm glad I'm not feeling like that guy. And that's true also. The losses were tough. They were tough to stomach. They didn't make you feel good. Winning is the greatest thing, and losing is the worst thing. So you had that ends of the spectrum to deal with. But the feeling of winning and being with your guys in the locker room, there is no greater feeling than that.
Did you and you said you spent a lot of time with the assistants. Did you take on Rolly's personality? Did you give him a little Greek flavor, like a little spanakopita instead of pasta?
It's funny. I continued so many of the things that Rolly had us do. My assistants came over to my house after every game. They probably weren't happy about it. I don't know. I kind of liked it when we used to do that with Coach Massimino. I did the same thing. I wanted them because I needed to talk about what happened. And so even though we were sitting there having a drink, having a beer, or eating something, we were working. You know what I mean? We were talking about the raw emotions of what we saw without seeing the tape. And sometimes we watched the tape after the game too. It depended on what it was. But, that was one of the things I inherited from Rolly that I continued to do, which was, having the assistants come over to my house after, or it's going out somewhere afterwards and talking about what just happened.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, I got to say, thanks so much for coming out and hanging with us. I really enjoyed it. You and I know each other, gosh, probably 37 years, 36, 37 years. And it's been a hell of a ride for you. You've done everything you could possibly do. A national championship. You were the bottom guy. You were the top guy. You're the TV guy. You've done it all and all very, very well. So it's so good. So good to see you, and thanks so much for joining Sonny and I on the Big East Rewind today.
No, I appreciate you guys having me on. The one thing that I will finish with is that I've been so lucky, Chuck, I had no business having this kind of life. I wasn't a good player. My father was a florist in Jamaica, Queens. He was, we spoke Greek at home, and to have had the life that I've had in basketball and still doing what I'm doing, I'm the luckiest guy there is. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
That's right.
Thanks a million.
You've been listening to the Big East Rewind with Chuck Everson and Sonny Spera. The Big East Rewind was directed and produced by Daryl Gurney and Nick Chico Chorus. You can check us out on YouTube. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And we'll see you all next time. Everybody have a great night. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks, Coach.